My name is Lucian Trent, and at my sister's wedding, her father-in-law looked straight past me like I didn't even exist. He brushed by without a nod, without a glance. Just that air of quiet dismissal that men like him have spent a lifetime perfecting. I stood there in a tailored suit, drink in hand, knowing something he didn't. See, Roland Rowe, the man so proud of his last name he probably signs it in gold ink, had spent the last 6 months trying to buy out a tech company he didn't realize I co-founded. A company his own business relied on. A company I built from nothing while raising my sister from the ashes of our old life. But Roland only saw what he wanted to see. A nameless, titleless nobody. He saw the surface. That's what men like him do. And frankly, I was fine with that. Because in a few minutes, after I got called up for an impromptu speech, I would introduce myself. And when I did, everything about the way he looked at me would change. His posture, his expression, his grip on the wine glass. Some people don't like surprises. Roland? He turned pale. And I just smiled. They say the hardest part of loss is the silence that follows. That's true, but no one tells you about the noise that comes before it. The ring of a phone at an hour it should never ring. The static in your ears when someone says the words you swore you'd never hear. For me, it was the sound of my college advisor saying, "Lucian, there's been an accident." My father was gone. Just like that. One moment, he was planning a trip to visit me and my younger sister, Isolde. The next, I was driving back to a hometown that already felt foreign without him in it. I was 22 and exhausted from finals. Isolde was 17, 1 week shy of her high school graduation. We had no mother in the picture. She'd left years ago to reinvent herself with a new family. So it was just us. 2 orphans, 1 car, and a future that had just crumbled overnight. The funeral was a blur. What came after was brutal clarity. Debt. So much debt. My father had been self-employed, and somewhere along the way, things must have spiraled. Loans, missed payments, business liens. He must have been trying to protect us from it, shielding us until the very end. But once the obituary printed, the creditors came knocking, hard. They took everything. The house, the car, his workshop. All we had left was the small suitcase of clothes I'd packed for spring break. My scholarship covered tuition. But rent? Groceries? Isolde's tuition? We were on our own. That night, after the last relative left and the door clicked shut, I remember sitting on the floor with Isolde. She was crying, knees tucked under her hoodie, and I realized, no one else is coming. I was the only adult left in her world, so I made a decision. I would finish school, get a job, any job, and keep us above water. I took on work in the campus cafe, picked up evening shifts as a courier, and slept maybe 4 hours a night. There were days when I went to class still sweating from hauling boxes up 4 flights of stairs. But every dollar I earned stretched across 2 mouths, 2 lives. I lost my girlfriend somewhere along the way. She was kind, but she needed more than voicemail apologies and forgotten date nights. I let her go, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't have enough of myself left to give. People talk about building character like it's some polished process. Mine was forged in overdraft fees and bus transfers. It was built when I looked at my little sister and knew she still deserved a future, even if I had to burn mine to light the path. After graduation, I didn't celebrate. There was no cap toss, no party photos, just a quiet sigh and a job offer at a mid-sized firm doing back-end operations. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid, and that was enough. I moved us into a modest 1-bedroom apartment. Isolde took the bedroom. I took the couch. She started community college while I juggled spreadsheets and client calls. Every night, I cooked us dinner, even if dinner was just rice and eggs, and on weekends, I caught up on sleep in broken shifts. But even in that grind, I kept one eye on the future. I enrolled in online courses, marketing, automation systems, SaaS platforms, anything that could sharpen my skills. I didn't know what opportunity would come, but I swore I'd be ready when it did. It came one rainy Thursday evening. I got a message from Felix Marin, an old classmate who remembered my business instincts. He and another friend were building a tech tool for automating back-end systems. He needed someone who could handle operations and pitch to early clients. I was hesitant. It sounded unstable. But it also sounded alive. And I hadn't felt alive in years. So I said yes. My life split in two. From 8 to 5, I wore slacks and answered to middle managers. From 7 p.m. to 2 a.m., I lived in code bases, flowcharts, and pitch decks with Felix. We built out of coffee shops and borrowed server space. Some nights I passed out with my laptop still glowing on my chest. Money was tight. Arguments happened. One of our co-founders left after a brutal 6-month dry spell. Felix and I stayed. Barely. Then came the breakthrough. A corporate client piloted our tool and slashed their processing time by 40%. They told 3 others. Suddenly, we had demos booked, inboxes flooded, and feedback loops we barely had time to process. A review on a major tech blog gave us our first real wave of inbound interest. But even then, I didn't quit my day job. I'd learned too early how fragile stability could be. I saved every spare cent. I handled customer service tickets, invoicing, and system bugs in between lunch breaks and late nights. Felix became the public face. He networked, smiled at cameras, gave TEDx talks. I was the man behind the curtain, and I liked it that way. Because while others chased titles and LinkedIn clout, I chased something else: peace of mind. A life where Isolde didn't have to count every dollar at the grocery store. A life where her future wasn't defined by what we lost. She got into a state university on merit. I paid every bill on time. We had backup savings, health insurance, working appliances. That felt like luxury. No one saw how much it took, and I didn't need them to. But that silence, the choice to stay unseen, meant people like Roland Rowe could meet me and assume I was small. And that was fine by me, because I'd rather be underestimated than misjudged. I'd rather be invisible than falsely praised. But life has a way of bringing things full circle, especially when your sister decides to get married. It was a Tuesday night when Isolde called. I had just collapsed onto the couch, still in my work clothes, eating cold leftover pasta straight from the container. She sounded breathless, excited, but also strangely hesitant. "Lucian," she said, "I have something to tell you." I assumed it was about school, maybe a project or an internship. I didn't expect her next words. "I'm getting married." My fork paused in midair. "You're what?" "To Damien," she said quickly, like ripping off a bandage. "We've been seeing each other seriously for a while now, but I didn't tell you because I didn't know how." I blinked. I'd met a Damien once, in passing, but I'd never heard her mention anything serious. "Isolde, married? That's huge. Are you okay?" She laughed nervously. "I'm more than okay. I'm happy. I just needed to tell you before things moved further. He wants to meet you." That caught my attention. Anyone who wanted to marry my sister had better want to meet me. I was her brother, yes, but more than that, I was the one who stayed. I'd played every role in her life that mattered: parent, tutor, emergency contact, friend. If someone wanted to step in now, I needed to look him in the eye and measure the shape of his soul. We arranged to meet that Friday. Just a casual dinner, nothing formal. I offered to cook. I still remember opening the door and seeing Damien standing there, flowers in one hand, a bottle of wine in the other, and a grin that tried a little too hard. Something about him felt familiar. We exchanged pleasantries, sat down, and talked. He was polite, well-spoken, clearly adored my sister, but there was something in his last name that tugged at me. "Rowe," I said aloud, turning it over in my head like a coin. "Any relation to Roland Rowe?" He paused for a fraction of a second too long. "He's my father." That's when it clicked. Roland Rowe was one of our biggest enterprise clients. Not just that, he'd been actively trying to acquire our platform for months. His emails always came laced with thinly veiled offers, the kind that suggested he thought he was doing us a favor by showing interest. He was a businessman through and through, sharp suits, sharper tone, and a reputation for crushing partnerships just to own the scraps. He was all over the industry blogs. He wasn't evil, just dismissive, transactional. And now, here I was, sitting across the table from his son. I kept my face neutral, my tone even. I didn't mention the company, didn't bring up business at all. This was about Isolde. If Damien was decent, I'd find a way to make peace with the rest. Later that night, Isolde pulled me aside in the kitchen. You went quiet for a while there. Everything okay? I nodded. I'm just surprised. You really love him? I do, she said. He's not like his father, Lucien. He's kind, steady, he listens. I studied her face. She wasn't pleading, she was glowing. And she never glowed easily. Okay, I said at last. Then I'm in your corner. Weeks passed. Wedding planning took over her life. I offered to help where I could, but kept my distance from the formalities, until the family meet and greet. It was held at an upscale country club, all white tablecloths and waitstaff in black vests. Isolde asked me to attend, and I said yes, more for her than for them. I met Roland face to face that day. The moment I walked into the room, his eyes found me. He took me in quickly, shoes, suit, posture, before looking away. When we were formally introduced, he offered a limp handshake and said, "Oh, you're just her brother. I assumed her father would be here." I stared at him. Our father passed away, a long time ago. He gave the briefest nod of acknowledgement before moving on. Then came the inevitable question. What is it that you do, again? There it was, that investor instinct, sniffing out pedigree. I work corporate, I said. True, in a sense. He didn't hide his disinterest, didn't even try. And that was fine. I didn't come to impress him. But part of me, a small part I usually kept buried, whispered, "You'll regret that." I told Felix about the encounter later that night. He just laughed and said, "The universe has a weird sense of humor." The weeks flew by, and soon the wedding day arrived. Isolde looked radiant, the kind of beauty that didn't just come from the dress or the makeup. It came from knowing you were loved, and loving back without fear. She gripped my hand before walking down the aisle and whispered, "Thank you for everything." I just smiled. At the reception, I stayed out of the spotlight, chatting quietly with guests. Then I saw Roland approach with 2 other men. He walked past me, again. Didn't even pause. It was deliberate, calculated. And I felt nothing but quiet certainty. He still didn't know who I was. Not really. But he was about to find out. I wasn't planning to speak. There was no note in the program, no cue for a brother of the bride speech. I'd already played my role. Walked Isolde down the aisle, stood tall in family photos, raised my glass during toasts. That was enough. I didn't need the spotlight. But someone must have added my name to the speaker list. A member of the catering staff tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're next. 2 minutes." I blinked. Next for what? She gestured toward the stage. "Speech, the mic's ready." I could have declined. Should have, maybe. But something in me, some mix of fatigue, pride, and memory, told me not to. This was my sister's wedding. The closest thing I had to a daughter was entering a new life. And the room still didn't know who I was. So I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked to the front of the room. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady. "My name is Lucien Trent. I'm Isolde's brother." That caught their attention. I continued. But I wasn't just her brother growing up. After our father passed unexpectedly, I became her guardian. I was 22. She was 17. We had no other family. Our mother had long since moved on. The room shifted. Glasses were lowered. Forks paused. I was finishing college when it happened, and I couldn't afford to fall apart, not when she needed food, a roof, tuition. So I worked. Day shifts, night shifts, weekends. I slept less than I'd like to admit. I lost friends. I lost someone I loved. I glanced at Isolde. She was already crying. "But we made it," I said softly. "She made it because she's brilliant and brave and has a heart that forgave me for the moments I wasn't enough." A quiet rustle moved through the crowd. Even Roland, across the room, had turned to face me. "I also want to say this," I added, my voice lifting just a bit. "During those years, while trying to survive, I helped build a startup, a software platform. Some of you may even use it." That line landed harder than I expected. I saw heads tilt. A few guests exchanged glances. My co-founder, Felix, over there, joined me on a leap of faith. We started with borrowed code and busted laptops. Now we support some of the biggest firms in the country. I let that hang in the air. And while I didn't come here to talk business, I share it because it's part of the story. The same story that led me to this room, this day, this moment. I turned toward Isolde and Damien. I'm proud of you, both of you. You've found something rare: trust, partnership, joy. And I'm honored to stand here and say, you're ready. With that, I stepped away from the mic, nodded at the applauding room, and made my way back to my table. But I didn't get far. Roland Rowe intercepted me like a shadow emerging from the wall. He extended his hand, smile tight. Lucian, wasn't it? That was quite a speech. I shook his hand, firm but not eager. Thank you. You're the co-founder of E? I nodded. Yes. That company you've been trying to acquire. His smile faltered, just a fraction. I had no idea, he admitted. Why didn't you say anything when we met? I held his gaze. Because I wanted you to see who I was when you thought I was nobody. He didn't reply. Didn't need to. I gave him a polite smile. Enjoy the evening, Mr. Rowe. Then I walked past him, back to Felix, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. We clinked glasses. The tension dissolved. The rest of the night? Smooth, joyful. Isolde danced like a woman free of old shadows. Damien was gracious. Roland stayed civil. But something in his eyes had changed. Less arrogance, more calculation. That was fine. Because I hadn't said anything untrue. And I hadn't said everything either. We never sold the company to Roland Rowe, not out of spite. Not even because of how he treated me. Truth is, the offers were impressive on paper. But I've learned to look beyond numbers. His interest wasn't built on mutual respect. It was built on the assumption that everything and everyone has a price. And I don't do business with men who only learn your worth after they read your resume. So Felix and I stayed independent. We scaled with purpose. We didn't need a buyout. We needed space to grow on our terms. Ironically, Rowe Industries still licenses our platform. His employees file support tickets through the same portal as everyone else. We respond quickly, professionally. Always polite, never personal, strictly business. Damien never brought it up. He respects boundaries, and more importantly, he respects Isolde. Over time, we've built something close to trust. I don't hold his last name against him. He's not his father. He never was. Isolde is thriving. She has peace in her life now, real peace. She teaches, gardens, volunteers on weekends, and she smiles in a way she didn't when we were younger, when everything felt like it might fall apart any second. That smile is what I fought for. That's the return on my investment. Sometimes, people still assume I'm just the guy in the background. Quiet, unremarkable. And I let them think that, because I know the truth. The ones who dismiss you when you're silent are the same ones who will scramble to respect you once someone announces your title. But by then, their respect means nothing. True respect shows up when no one's watching. It's not a reaction. It's a choice. Roland's biggest mistake wasn't underestimating me. It was assuming that being unseen meant being unimportant. But I've never needed the spotlight. All I needed was to know that my sister would be okay. And now, she is. That's more than enough for me. If there's one thing this whole journey has taught me, it's this. You don't rise by being loud, by forcing people to see you. You rise by standing firm in who you are, quietly, steadily, and with dignity. When people finally notice, let it be on your terms, not theirs. Because at the end of the day, what matters most isn't who applauds you. It's who you protected while no one was watching. I never thought the sharpest humiliation of my life would come with string lights, white roses, and champagne flutes. But there I was, at my younger sister's wedding, smiling through clenched teeth, wearing a rental dress I ironed in a motel bathroom, and pretending that maybe, just maybe, I belonged. My name is Rowan Ashford. I'm 34, a single mother, a waitress, a woman who's learned to be quiet when it hurts. I raised my son Jude on tips and grit. We live in a small apartment above a florist shop where you can hear every passing truck shake the floorboards. It's not glamorous, but it's ours. That night, Jude sat beside me in his too-tight blazer, eyes wide with wonder at the chandeliers. He thought we were walking into something magical. I let him believe that, but then my sister, Delilah, took the microphone. She smiled that wide, gleaming smile of hers, the kind that fools a room full of strangers, and said she wanted to thank her big sister for being a shining example. I exhaled, just a little, thinking maybe she'd grown. And then she said it. She's done it all on her own. No husband, no help, clearly no takers. But hey, she's here. The laughter was loud, the kind that echoes. Jude looked up at me, confused. I felt his little hand slide into mine. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't about family. It never had been. People like to romanticize the idea of family. The Sunday dinners, the old photo albums, the inside jokes that live forever in group texts. But for me, family has always been a quiet kind of exile. I didn't grow up poor. I grew up invisible. Catherine Ashford, my mother, had a talent for playing favorites. And in her eyes, there was only one star worth watching. My younger sister, Delilah. Delilah was the kind of girl who glided through life with a spotlight trailing her. She was blonde, bold, and blessed from birth. Valedictorian, homecoming queen, college scholarship, and now a picture-perfect wedding. Me? I was the girl who got pregnant at 25 by a man who disappeared faster than the second pink line on the test. When Jude was born, he became my whole world. I learned to cook with one hand and bounce him on my hip with the other. I skipped meals so he wouldn't. I worked 2 jobs, slept in shifts, and loved him so fully it made the loneliness bearable. But the rest of my family? They looked at me like a cautionary tale. A failure. A woman who had made her bed and was now doomed to sleep in it, alone. So when Delilah's wedding invitation came in the mail, I almost threw it out. My name was spelled wrong, again. The RSVP card didn't include a +1. I wasn't asked to be in the bridal party, and instead of an actual note from my sister, it came with a mass-printed message thanking guests for supporting our perfect day. I stared at it for a long time. Then I looked over at Jude, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing rocket ships on the back of a takeout menu. He'd never been to a wedding before, never seen his mother in a dress, never gotten to feel like part of the family he technically belonged to. So I said yes. I rented a dress off a clearance rack and borrowed heels from a coworker. I did my own hair in the mirror over our leaky sink while Jude practiced smiling in his clip-on tie. I told myself it was for him. Maybe, just maybe, showing up would shift something. Maybe they'd see us again. The venue was gorgeous. White roses lined the aisle, gold-accented cutlery sparkled under chandeliers, and a quartet played soft strings in the background. The kind of place that smelled like old money and expensive decisions. When we arrived, Delilah walked past me in a gown that looked straight out of a bridal magazine. She glanced down at Jude, then at me. "You made it," she said, like it was a surprise. "He's getting big," she added flatly, before turning back to the spotlight. No hug, no warmth, just a confirmation that I was still second tier. My mother didn't even acknowledge us. She brushed past like we were part of the decor. Jude didn't notice. He was too busy marveling at the lights. He leaned over and whispered, "It looks like a spaceship, Mama." I smiled and squeezed his hand. We were seated at the table 14, near the kitchen doors, where you could smell the dishwater every time they swung open. I laughed quietly. Of course. Still, I told myself to stay calm. It was just one night. Jude was happy. That had to count for something. And then came the speeches. The room was humming with energy. The soft clinking of glasses, flashes from phones, bursts of laughter that didn't include me. Delilah's world was seamless, polished, and curated. And there I was, the wrinkle in the fabric, sitting near the waitstaff doors and praying no one spilled wine on my rented dress. Jude sat beside me, swinging his legs, completely enchanted. "Mama, did you see that cake?" "It's taller than me," he whispered, eyes wide. His innocence was my only armor. I kept smiling for him. The place cards were letterpressed and embossed with gold. I found mine wedged between someone's purse and a discarded cocktail napkin. They spelled it Rowan. I didn't bother correcting it. Dinner arrived in waves, plated elegance I couldn't pronounce. Jude tried to eat politely, but at one point got chocolate mousse on his tie. I dabbed at the stain with a linen napkin and whispered, "You're doing great, baby." He beamed. From across the room, I caught my mother's eye. For a brief second, I thought she might nod, smile, acknowledge my existence. Instead, she turned to the woman beside her and laughed at something. It could have been about anything, but I knew it was me. I always knew. I shifted in my seat, trying to stay invisible, knowing the cameras weren't for us. Delilah flitted from table to table like a politician, always smiling, always the center of attention. And when she finally reached ours, her eyes flicked over me like I was a placeholder. "You two look nice," she said, not even bothering to crouch to Jude's level. "Thanks for inviting us," I offered. She gave a tight smile. "Of course," she said, her tone making it clear she didn't mean it. Then came the toasts. A man in a navy suit, her fiancé's best friend, stood and told a safe, forgettable story about how Delilah used to sneak extra fries in college. People laughed. It was charming in that harmless, beige way. Then Delilah stood. She looked stunning, of course. Her dress shimmered under the reception lights. Her posture was flawless, her smile effortless. She held her champagne flute like a queen holding court. The room fell silent. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began. "It's the happiest day of my life, and I'm surrounded by people who mean everything to me." I held my breath. Jude leaned against my arm, still riding the fairy tale. Delilah talked about love, about fate, about Nate being her best friend. It was sweet, even I had to admit that, and for a moment, I let myself hope that maybe she wouldn't twist the knife. But then she turned. "And of course," she said, her voice lilting with mock sincerity, "I want to acknowledge my big sister, Rowan. She's always been such a strong example." The spotlight shifted. Eyes turned. I straightened my spine. I smiled politely. "She's the bravest woman I know," Delilah continued. "She raised a child on her own. No husband, no help, just her and whatever babysitter was kind enough to step in." A few people chuckled. My stomach dropped. "But seriously," she added, her tone dripping sweet poison, "it's amazing how she's managed. A single mom, unwanted, but she still shows up." Laughter, louder this time. Not confused, not hesitant, just loud. I went cold. Jude blinked up at me, his small hand tightening around mine. "Why did she say that, Mama?" he whispered. Before I could respond, my mother's voice rang out from across the room. "She's a used product," Catherine said, her voice soaked in pride. "But hey, she still polishes up nice." The laughter turned sharp, cruel, real. I sat there frozen. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the music. I felt everyone watching, everyone laughing. Not with me, never with me, at me. I looked around, faces I'd grown up with, shared holidays with. Not one looked sorry. Not one looked surprised. Even Grandpa Henry, who once called me his little shadow, was staring down at his untouched dessert. And Jude, he looked shattered. Not because he understood all the words, but because he saw my face, and he saw theirs. That's when something in me cracked. I don't remember standing. One moment I was gripping my napkin like it was a lifeline, and the next I was upright, heart thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't have a plan. No speech. No dramatic exit. I just knew I couldn't sit there another second while people toasted my shame. I felt Jude's small fingers tighten around mine. "Are we leaving?" he asked, his voice small, unsure. I nodded. "Yeah, baby, we're going." But before we could take a step, another chair scraped loudly against the floor. All eyes turned to the head table. Nathaniel Clark, the groom, Delilah's perfect polished fiancé, was rising slowly to his feet. He didn't look at Delilah. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at me. His face wasn't angry. It wasn't smug. It was something colder, stern, resolute. He reached for the microphone in Delilah's hand. She hesitated, just for a beat. Then, sensing the shift in the room, she let go. The mic whined softly as Nate adjusted it. The entire room went still. You could have heard a fork drop. He exhaled once, then said calmly, "Rowan, please don't go." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. I froze, Jude half-shielded behind me. "I can't pretend I'm okay with what just happened," Nate continued, his voice steady, almost too calm. "I won't stand up here and let cruelty pass as comedy. Not tonight. Not ever." Delilah's face hardened. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Nate stepped out from behind the table, slowly approaching where we stood at the back of the room. He didn't rush. He walked like a man moving through fog, deliberate, certain, and unafraid. "I've heard a lot about family while planning this wedding," he said. "Tradition, loyalty, appearances." He stopped just beside our table, not quite facing me, not quite facing the guests. But what I saw just now wasn't family. It was mockery in a dress and a mother laughing at her own daughter's pain. The air left the room. Catherine sat frozen, her wineglass halfway to her lips. Nate turned toward Delilah. "You mocked your sister in front of everyone. You reduced her life to a punchline. And worse, you made her son watch." Delilah's jaw twitched. "It was a joke," she said softly. "It was cruelty," he answered. And then he turned to Jude, kneeled, looked him in the eye. "Your mom," he said gently, "is the strongest person in this room. Don't ever forget that." Jude didn't say a word. He just stared, wide-eyed, breathing quietly. When Nate stood again, he faced the crowd one last time. "I don't want to marry into a family that thinks shame is tradition, and laughter is more important than dignity, so I won't." And then he walked, past Delilah, past her parents, past the stunned guests still gripping their champagne flutes. He never looked back, and just like that, the fairy tale collapsed. People turned, shifting uncomfortably, some whispering. Others watched us like a scene from a train crash they couldn't look away from. Catherine stood up sharply, her chair screeching. "What an ungrateful boy," she barked. Typical Ashford women, always making a scene. But no one laughed this time. No one clinked a glass. No one cheered. Her voice fell flat in a room that had already decided she'd lost. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. For once, I wasn't the one who looked small. I turned to Jude and brushed his hair from his forehead. "Let's go home," I whispered. He nodded, and we walked. Slowly, past their shocked faces, past their silence. Halfway to the exit, I heard my name. "Rowan!" It was Grandpa Henry. His voice shook. His eyes were rimmed red. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said something." "Years ago." I nodded. I understood. His silence had hurt, but I knew how loud fear could be, and I wasn't carrying his guilt anymore. We stepped into the night air. It was cool, crisp, clean. Jude squeezed my hand. "Is the wedding over?" I smiled. "Yeah, baby. I think it ended exactly how it was supposed to." The silence that followed us out of that reception hall was deafening. No music played. No one followed. Even the air outside felt freer, like stepping out of a pressure chamber. Jude was quiet as we walked to the car. His small hand still wrapped in mine, like he wasn't sure the world had stopped spinning yet. I helped him into the back seat, buckled him in, and sat behind the wheel for a long time before starting the engine. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just felt still. The drive home was quiet. No radio, just the soft hum of tires on asphalt, and Jude tapping his fingers against the window in a rhythm only he understood. That night, after I tucked him in and kissed his forehead, I stood at his doorway for longer than usual. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way that made the contrast from earlier even starker. The next morning, I woke up to 12 missed calls. Unknown numbers, distant cousins, even some guests I hadn't spoken to in years. I ignored them all. By noon, a friend texted me a link to a Facebook video. Someone had recorded Nate's speech. It had already hit 50,000 views. The comments were pouring in. She deserved better. He's a real man. Every single mom out there just got a little bit of justice. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear suits at weddings. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just let myself feel it. The weight that had been crushing me for years, suddenly gone. Later that week, a small bouquet of wildflowers arrived at my door. No return address, no note, just a tiny card that read, "To the Lioness." I didn't need to ask who sent it. The wedding was off, quietly scrubbed from Delilah's social media like it had never existed. No public explanation, no dramatic posts, just erased. She never reached out. Catherine did, once. Not to apologize, of course. Just to say that I had embarrassed the family by not playing along, that my lack of humor had ruined everything. I let her talk for 30 seconds. Then I said something I never thought I'd have the courage to say. "I'm not your scapegoat anymore." And I hung up. No tears, no shouting, just a clean break. Final. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need them to admit they were wrong. I just needed to stop waiting for permission to see my own worth. Jude changed too. He asked more questions now. About kindness, about cruelty, about what makes someone brave. Sometimes he'd give pretend speeches to his action figures, defending the little guy. I watched him, quietly amazed. One night, as we brushed our teeth side by side, he looked up at me in the mirror and asked, "Mom, are you still sad about what Aunt Delilah said?" I paused, then answered honestly, "Not anymore. Why?" He shrugged, a little toothpaste on his chin. "Because I think you won, even though it wasn't a fight." That stayed with me. Because he was right. I didn't yell. I didn't insult anyone back. I didn't storm out crying or demand justice. I just stood up, held my son's hand, and walked away. And someone else, someone unexpected, finally spoke the words I never could. 6 months have passed since the wedding that wasn't. There was no official statement, no family meeting, no dramatic confrontation, just silence. A silence that, for once, wasn't mine to carry. Delilah moved on like nothing had happened. The bridal photos vanished from her Instagram. The countdown posts and ring selfies stopped. Catherine stayed quiet too, except for one email she sent me weeks later with the subject line, "When you're ready to talk like adults." I never opened it. I didn't need to. Because the truth is, I didn't walk out of that wedding for revenge or vindication. I walked out because I was done. Done shrinking, done apologizing for surviving, done being the family's living cautionary tale. My life didn't transform overnight. I still work the same shifts, still juggle rent and groceries and laundry, but I stand straighter. I speak louder when it matters. And I no longer hide in the back of rooms I've earned the right to be in. I see the change in Jude, too. He doesn't just look at me like I'm his mom. He looks at me like I'm the kind of person he wants to become. Someone who doesn't break, even when the world tells her she should. He still talks about Nate sometimes, calls him the man with the microphone. Sometimes he'll ask why Nate did what he did. I always give the same answer. Because love isn't about saying the right things when it's easy. It's about doing the hard thing when it counts. That night, I didn't get a bouquet. I didn't toss one either. I didn't dance under fairy lights or cry happy tears into a champagne glass. But I left with something better. I left with my son's hand in mine, my dignity intact, and the quiet certainty that I no longer owe anyone an explanation for the life I've built. And that was the ending no one saw coming, especially the ones who thought they'd written me out of the story.